Okay, welcome to the Leading Your International Schools podcast. My name is Barry Cooper, and with me today, the fantastic Alistair Downs, all the way from Riyadh. So we're going to be talking about startup schools and Saudi Arabia. And I'm going to let Alistair, who has had a ridiculously interesting career, introduce himself for a couple of minutes and just tell us, in that whole Cilla Black kind of way, who are you and where have you come from? How did you get to where you are today?
Okay, morning, Barry. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I'm Alistair Downs. I'm currently Education Director for the Reigate Grammar School group of schools, which we are rolling out in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I suppose over the last best part of 20 years now internationally, I suppose I've developed into a bit of a startup specialist, I suppose you could say. That was my first headship back in Thailand. In 2010. That was my first headship, and that was a startup school. And so since then, I've had 3 other headships that have all been startups, and they come with immense reward, but they do come with quite a lot of challenges. I know you're aware of as well, Barry, which we'll get into further down the line. But at the moment, yeah, I'm in Riyadh at the moment. Reigate Grammar School, currently we have 1 school, which is in Riyadh, but we are looking to roll out additional schools in Riyadh. 1 is in the development stage now, and also looking at both the Eastern Province and over in Jeddah as well.
Fantastic. So, I mean, 4 startup schools, that's a lot. I've been involved only with 3 and not as a head. So this is I'm running a school here in Madrid. So, I mean, from your perspective, having done this 4 times, you're glutton for punishment. What makes a great startup school? What is it in your mind, if you were going to pick 4 or 5 things, what is it that you look for? What is it you try and give to a new project?
I suppose maybe if I start with what attracts me to startups maybe first, and although I mean there's nothing quite like it in terms of how draining it can be and the demands, but the reward is quite incredible, and the opportunity to maybe a startup from an existing building which is being repurposed, it may be a startup from just an empty piece of land, but seeing that school over a period of years come to life and have the energy and be a thriving community, and you to be the person who's driving that and leading it, and I suppose developing a team to put their own stamp and mark on it. There really is nothing quite like it. There are hundreds of successful schools all over the world. Many have been around for tens, hundreds of years, and those schools, of course, bring their own different types of challenges. But for me, the excitement and the buzz you get from starting essentially from a blank canvas and developing that is just the reward is quite incredible. So I suppose that's why I'm interested. That's why I like doing startups. In terms of kind of what you look for, I think the main challenge that you have to, I suppose, overcome is you have a new school going into often a new market, or certainly a new market for that school. And yes, there are challenges such as the obvious build and the snagging list, which will go on seemingly forever. Building those relationships with government, with businesses, with community, marketing, and I suppose those are all important first impressions. But I think the overall challenge is being able to articulate what you were about as a school and the vision of the school to the wider community, and that includes through marketing, it includes government, it includes your staff, because other schools will be in the same city, the same town, the same country, and they're established, and the community, parents, they might not know the school, but often there's a perception that they know the school. They think they know what that school's about. Their children might not go to it, but we opened a school in Qatar. There were many schools in Qatar that were already established, and many parents think they know what those established schools are like. There's just already a perception of what they're like. Whereas if you're a new school, then you have to articulate that to them, because they say, well, who are you? You know, what do you stand for? What have you done? What are you about? And so I think that's the main, as well as everything else, that's the major challenge, really putting across what the school's about.
How far is the opening of a new school or a branded school, especially? So Reigate Grammar has an amazing history. It's an amazing school in the UK. How far is it taking Reigate Grammar and putting it into a new country? And how far is it taking Reigate Grammar and translating that to a new environment?
Sure, I think that is one of the major issues that some UK schools, some brands run into, is when they've got a highly successful school in the UK, been established for hundreds of years, and they essentially try to pick it up and put it down in China, the Middle East, South Asia, wherever it may be. One of the things I've really learned is that everywhere is different, and you really have to personalize what you're doing to that community. You have to respect the community, you have to respect the culture, and understand that one model does not fit all localities. Even within a locality, it doesn't necessarily fit all groups of people within a school, and you've got to be really sensitive to the difference. So I think that is one thing that I'm sure you've seen it maybe yourself. Some schools go overseas and they think they can just suddenly create this, small island of the UK within a country, and that's just not reality. You've got to take the best bits of the UK school, but you do have to personalize it to where you are.
So, I mean, from your career, you've been in China, you've been in Thailand, you've been in the Middle East. What are there? I mean, not kind of going into too much detail, but are there kind of core differences in terms of leading a school or creating an environment from these different regions that in your mind, you could pick out?
Yeah, I think probably comes back to that community, because a lot of schools, again, generalization maybe, but a lot of schools in China, Southeast Asia, if I look at brands maybe in Southeast Asia, and I look at brands in China that aren't necessarily international schools, maybe more the bilingual schools, the market there generally is more local students. Whereas in the Middle East, again, can differ from school to school, but the market is much more international. It is much more expatriate. Of course, there are local children who attend those schools, but the proportion isn't anywhere near as high as often the branded schools in Southeast Asia, certainly in Thailand, and the bilingual schools in China, which are very high proportion of local children. And I think that is a big difference, because you've got only a small number of nationalities in maybe branded schools in Southeast Asia or in China. You could have 60, 70 different nationalities more in international school in the Middle East, and also quite a high number of each of those nationalities. I'm sure you're aware there are schools all over the world who may say on their website, we've got 50 plus nationalities, but actually when you dig a little bit deeper, you find that maybe 90% are local, and they may have 50 nationalities, but actually a very small number of each of the nationalities. So I think that's a major difference, and really comes down to, again, that community aspect and trying to be true to yourself as a school, because especially in a truly international environment, you can't suddenly change what you believe in as a school, because different groups of parents who all have their own experience at school, they come to you with their own view and their own opinion, maybe a complaint, maybe something they'd like to change. Well, in a school in the Middle East where you've maybe got so many different nationalities, you can't possibly change everything all the time just because one group of parents wants to. So I think being true to the school, true to the vision, but at the same time, I suppose being open and being aware of the difference you have in the school, because that is such a strength of an international school as well. And You've got people, teachers as well, but you've got teachers, students, parents from all different backgrounds. They've all had different experiences. They've all got different skills. And in a school environment, you all come together, you learn, you share, you grow. And that gives such an incredibly rich environment for ourselves as adults, but also for the children to really develop, not just kind of academically, but also very much holistically as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm 100% with you. I think if we draw down into that, I mean, we're talking about bringing parents on side, bringing parents kind of inside the conversation. Are there specific? I mean, yeah, this is kind of leading your international school. So let's see what tricks of the trade maybe you can reveal. I mean, how have you in the past kind of brought parents inside the conversation and really made them feel kind of part of the school and got them on side and working for the school as opposed to maybe kind of bashing up against it?
Yeah. So it is, I'll be honest, it is one advantage of a startup is that you are going in and they are very much the founding families. And I think that is, in my experience, something that really can work in the school's favour. As a head teacher, you go into a school that's been established for a long time. There's already a parent body there who expect things to be done maybe in a certain way. Things have been done in a certain way, and going in and suddenly changing that, even if in the end it's changed for the better. We all know that change can be brings a bit of uncertainty. So in terms of my experience, and I suppose things that work well with it being a startup school, it is those first impressions of making people feel incredibly welcome, thanking them for trusting us as a school, because it is a little bit of a risk sometimes for a parent to join a brand new school which ultimately has no track record in that location. So thanking them that they've trusted the school and giving them genuine opportunity to be part of the community, not just through the classic parent-teacher groups, but also just through regular informal dialogue, the school gate chat, creating multiple avenues so that those parents who maybe aren't as confident to approach senior leaders or teachers or staff in the school, that they feel as though they can actually communicate to somebody. So different reps throughout the school, different reps of different backgrounds and nationalities. Many schools have class reps, but I've been into schools as an inspector and met with the class reps, and they are all of a very similar nationality. They're all of a very similar background, and that, although brings some positives in that you've still got that sense of community, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're involving the whole community. So I think establishing different, I suppose, avenues of communication so that people can really very part of it. But I think, as I said, as a startup school, you're in a fortunate position where you are starting it from day one. And so automatically, those parents who are joining a startup, they've almost bought in already, and so you are, and I think, often in an advantageous position.
How you talked about the school gate chat. I'm a big believer in kind of soft skills and kind of moving away from the structured communication kind of profile towards actually a bit more of an organic approach. How valuable is it for school leaders, do you think, just in general, and this is school leaders, deputy heads of departments, how valuable is it as a skill to be able to pick up the phone, to talk to a parent, to give good news, to be hanging around and just catching up and being convivial?
Honestly, I mean, I hold that as hard to say, the most important, but I think it is so incredibly important to be visible, and I think that there are different head teachers, different leaders who have different skill sets, and often their role is different. Think about maybe executive leadership, and they maybe got a different role than a on the ground principal, so to speak. But for somebody who is a leader within a school, I think it's very, very easy to actually become invisible in a school. and then you can, I think, start to lose the trust of the community. So being out, being personable, the school gate, the classic school gate or playground. Someone once told me that that's your first data point. And although that maybe sounds a little bit corporate almost, that's the first source of data for you who's leading that school, is to be on that school gate. How are people coming in? How are they feeling? But also to nip things in the bud. If someone does have a concern or a question, then you're there to hear it straight away. And so I do think that being involved in school life, being on the gate, just being around school, walking the corridors, on the playground, it doesn't mean that you have to be out and about all day, every day, because that's not realistic. But being a presence around school, I think, is incredibly important.
I mean, having worked in schools with kind of multiple nationalities, how can school leaders, in your view, get past, I think, that certain anxiety of working with maybe younger children who are not as confident in English, maybe children who are coming from different cultural backgrounds, maybe children who are just they're in a position where maybe they're a little bit terrified of the authority figure, and the authority figure is a little bit anxious about trying to build a bridge with someone who maybe there's difficulties there in terms of communication. How would you kind of suggest people go about thinking about that? I'm not talking about kind of tactics or things like that, but how do you go about thinking about things like that?
I always say, and I learned this when I first went to China, teaching English as a foreign language a long time ago, and children are children in my view. And it doesn't matter if they're I'm from the UK. It doesn't matter if they're British, first language English, from a particular family, or they are from China, can't speak a word of English. Ultimately, a 6-year-old child, for example, is a 6-year-old child, and I think that you just have to have the confidence that actually 6-year-old children, generally, yes, all children have different interests and all children are unique, but there is commonality across the board for 6-year-old child in terms of what they like to do, the things that generally 6-year-old children are interested in. And if you've gone into education, now you may have worked up to becoming, say, a principal and not being in the classroom on the chalk face, but you've gone into education, you've gone into teaching, you would hope, because you enjoy working with children, you're interested in working with children, and that's what you really enjoy and you're excited by. And so I think you just got to have the confidence in yourself that actually that's it might be 20 years ago when you were in the classroom, but that's what you've done. You may have children of your own, and just go in and talk to the children or play with the children as you would with your own children, as you would communicate with your own children or your own family. So I think it's just having the confidence to understand that all children are very unique, but also very similar, and having that confidence to do so, and especially those children who maybe don't speak a lot of English. That's sometimes where the most reward, I find, can come, where you do then build that relationship, because maybe they were apprehensive about coming to school, but actually somebody has given them the time to work with them, to play with them, and then they become more relaxed in school, and it builds from there.
You talked about kind of being out of the classroom. Do you think school principals should teach? And I should tell you, I'm a teaching principal, so I do have a history class.
Bit of bias.
There's a bit of bias from my side. There's a bit of bias, but I mean, do you think it's advantageous? Do you think actually it's I mean, what's your kind of perspective on that as an education?
So I would say that I think that not necessarily teaching. But it depends on, I think, size of the school, again, the role of the principal. In a very large school, the reality is that you have other senior leaders. And I think going in and popping in and very much being part of school life, I think is incredibly important. Not necessarily teaching a certain amount of periods each week. I think if you are able to, great. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily a necessity. I think you need to know what's going on in your school, and I think you very much need to be part of school life. But if that means teaching, a 10% timetable every week or whatever it may be, I don't necessarily believe that there's a need for that. But that also, I'm very much not someone who would say, be chained to the desk in the office sort of thing. I think you have to be knowledgeable about what's happening in school, but not necessarily teaching in school.
Yeah, it's an interesting one though, isn't it? The further up the career ladder you move in education, the further away you move from what you got into education to do.
Yeah, as I said, I think it does depend on the type of school, because, as you know, some principals, some executive principals of schools, many are now called CEOs. If it's a huge school, that their role is possibly changing from when they first became a principal or a head teacher, when maybe they were much more on the ground. Whereas the reality is that in a school of 2,000-3,000, maybe even more, actually there's so many layers of senior leadership below them who may well be teaching and involved in school. And that executive principal still, in my view, should have an awareness of what is happening in the school, but maybe in that role, it's a different type of role, and it's unrealistic for them to be having scheduled timetable lessons, because the worst thing for students is that if things start getting cancelled or things crop up, well, ultimately that lesson then gets covered, and that's obviously not good for the students.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm very much on the smaller side. So my school is only just under 300. So we're at the other end of that. But it's an interesting, and it's one I've struggled with as well. Is actually, am I doing the right thing by being in the classroom? And I think it's one I'll continue to struggle with. In terms of culture, I think where you're working at the moment is incredibly exciting, because we talked a little bit about this before we started recording the session. And you're based in Saudi, and Saudi, it seems from the outside at least to just have exploded in terms of international education. Can you give us a sense of what's happening in Saudi at the moment, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? What's the reality on the ground in Riyadh, in Jeddah, etc.?
So, I mean, it is incredibly exciting. It is, but I would say that it is exploding rather than it's exploded. So yes, there is a huge amount going on. There's a huge amount of interest in Saudi. The country as a whole, if you look across the region, many of the countries, within the Middle East, relatively small populations. Yes, UAE maybe around 10 million, but many of the other countries, 5 million. Certainly, you look at someone like Bahrain or Qatar, 1 or 2 million. Saudi, best part of 40 million. So, very different in terms of geographical size, but also population size compared to the other countries in the region. So, it is very exciting. There are a lot of schools, particularly UK brands, which is what I obviously work for. A lot of UK brands who are already established here, who have started up in the last couple of years. And I know from speaking to the UK embassy and from being involved in kind of the trade missions that come out here from the UK, that there are many, many more schools who are interested in opening in Riyadh, because there is such a high proportion as well of younger people living in Saudi Arabia as well, but the population is really quite young. So there's a real thirst for change, I suppose, in terms of education and opening up education. Private schooling, again, there's I think been around about 1 million children in private schools for the last 3 or 4 years. That's been fairly steady. I think that's been around about 15% of children. In the next 6 to 7 years, that's expected to go to 1.7 million. So, when you break that down and you look at, 6 or 7 years to 2030, and you're looking at 700,000 plus more students in school, of course, that's all schools from nurseries through to K-12 schools. But I was at a conference and the chatter was that, okay, well, even if you average that out at maybe 1,000 students in a school, that is a huge number of schools that need to be built. You're looking at best part of 100 schools a year that need to be built in Saudi Arabia. So it is an exciting time. From the outside looking in, it does look as though, goodness me, that there is this absolute explosion, and there is a lot going on. But I do think it will be a good few years until there are a lot more kind of UK brands coming into the market, because there is demand, but there are a lot of challenges with finding land, finding maybe the right partner, licensing and so forth. The government are making it a lot easier, and there are special licenses. We're a Royal Commission school, Royal Commission for Riyadh City, which is a kind of a different license to the Ministry of Education license. But it's a process, as with everywhere in the world, to go through to obtain that. So very exciting time, and the education market will continue to grow massively. But I think we're at the start of the journey. Okay.
So tell me about because this is a country I've never been to. It's a country I've always wanted to visit, but I've just never got round to it, because I'm a historian, as you probably know, full of history, amazing place, birthplace of one of the the largest growing or the fastest growing religion in the world.
Yeah.
What's it like to live and work in Riyadh? What are the realities for people who are listening and maybe thinking, I've heard some bad stories.
Yeah.
What's it actually like?
So, I mean, the reality is that, so we're doing recruitment this time last year, for example, for the staff who arrived in August of 2023. And it was the first time we'd done recruitment, because Reigate a relatively new school here to Saudi Arabia. So it's the first time we'd gone through staffing who weren't the founding team. And so we weren't sure what the response would be. Also for senior leadership positions, we had a new head of prep and a new head of secondary who started in the August just gone. I was pleasantly surprised at the number of applicants that we had, and the number of really good applicants we had. And when you spoke to them, it was people who had done a lot of research. So they dug a little bit deeper rather than hearing and just maybe believing, I suppose, the stereotypical thoughts that you've maybe seen from years gone by, maybe outdated views. The reality is really very different. Our staff live on as many expats do, live on a kind of a Western compound, which has gym, it has multiple pools, it has tennis court. Walking around Riyadh, going to a shopping mall, it's very, very international. You go into the shopping mall and surprise, there's a H&M and a Zara and a Starbucks. It really is very, very international. All of the chain restaurants that you would expect are there, including many kind of independent restaurants. There's a really big coffee culture here. So it's very different to, I think, how maybe the outdated views that many people hold, especially some single women who applied, and they sometimes had some questions. Yes, many years ago, women would have to cover up, certainly cover their hair. There were times, again, many years ago when single females wouldn't be able to go out on their own. Obviously, the inability to drive legally was heavily publicised previously. That's now all gone. You go out into a shopping mall, you go and walk around Riyadh, and expatriate women are wearing jeans and a jumper, as you would wear where you are in Madrid. They've not got their hair covered. They're driving. They're meeting up with their friends. So that is changing, and that will continue to change as more and more expatriates come into Riyadh as well, and more things open. There's more and more theme parks, shopping centres, entertainment being built, and that side of things really is rapidly changing.
Fantastic. I mean, it sounds very much like Dubai a few years back. In terms of the in terms of the culture, the art scene, the fashion scene, is that something, because this is something that being in Dubai, there's a thick layer of kind of Westernism and malls and beaches and beach parties and hotels. But actually, if you kind of dig down and you get to know kind of, the locals, you get to know, people who've been there, 4 or 5 generations, it's actually a really interesting culture. It's full of kind of life, of art, of poetry, of, all of these things. Is that something that's there in Riyadh? And is that something that, teachers and leaders who are thinking of going to Riyadh can access?
I suppose yes and no, in that street art scene, for example, that there really is quite a large art scene here. It's there. It's just unlike somewhere like Dubai or maybe in Abu Dhabi or even somewhere like Doha, where a lot of things, channels of communication, for instance, are quite well established, and how to find out about things and access. Here again, things are in its infancy. So there's a lot of things going on. What's quite nice about here is the interaction that you can have with locals, with Saudis. There are other Middle Eastern countries where actually expatriates would often have no interaction with the local population. That is slightly different here. The Saudi people are incredibly welcoming, and you do get that interaction if you wish to have it. But it's finding out about things. So there's a lot going on, but still what needs to be developed a bit more is the access to the information, if that makes sense. There's Time Out Riyadh, for example, the monthly magazine that comes out, and that's a great source of information for expats. There are obviously a lot of things online, but if you compare it to someone like Dubai, it maybe is like Dubai 15 or 20 years ago, where things were really starting to develop. There was more and more happening. But people I know who lived in Dubai then, they would say that they might go into work on a Sunday morning, and some would say, "Oh, wow, great weekend. I went to whatever it might be." And you say, "Oh, well, I would have quite liked to have gone to that," but you didn't know about it because there weren't the information in abundance. And it feels like that a little bit in Riyadh. There's a lot going on, just needs to go that next step so that the information is more available.
In terms of language, I when I was in Dubai I was only there for a couple of years, but I did try and learn some Arabic, but I found very quickly it wasn't really needed because English was the lingua franca, wherever I went. What's the language like in Saudi? And is there a need, if you're going to go and live and work in Saudi, should people be thinking about, upskilling their language?
I think, well, my Arabic is limited, so
As is mine.
just to say the least. I think with any country, it's like when we're in China, we're in Thailand. We did try to learn some level of language because I think it's important to do when you're choosing it. Ultimately, you're choosing to live in a country, and it does open doors. And I think that locals do really appreciate it. I think in Saudi at the moment, certainly my own experience is in terms of cities is either Eastern Province, kind of Dammam, Khobar, Riyadh, or Jeddah on the west coast. And in those cities, to be frank, you don't need to be able to speak Arabic. You go in your day-to-day life, everyone really who you're interacting with speaks really quite a high standard of English. I think it's if you're going off the beaten track. So I haven't personally been, but I know some staff who have gone off to far-flung destinations within Saudi, and there are some absolutely incredible places to visit in Saudi, which again is different to other places, other countries within the Middle East that are maybe relatively smaller countries. Saudi is so huge. There are some incredible places to go. You want to go trekking, go to some amazing mountain destinations, incredible diving, kind of north of Jeddah on the Red Sea. Obviously, they're building a ski resort up in the north where Neom is. Really quite incredible. I suppose the diversity on offer, but the infrastructure to get to some of those places is still developing. And so, if you're going to go on a holiday really off the beaten track, that's when maybe English wouldn't be so widely spoken. But I don't think that's really different to, you know, what you'd experience in China, what I experienced there, what I experienced in Thailand. You know, if you're in a big city, English very widely spoken. You suddenly go off, you know, trekking in the mountains in Thailand to some small villages. Chances are people aren't speaking in English as well. So really no different to other countries I've experienced.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, my experience in Europe is actually English is not as widely spoken as maybe it was in Dubai, or what you're talking about there in the major cities in Saudi, or even in China, where there was a big kind of expat. I mean, I was in Shanghai, a big expat population, and you have that opportunity there to learn a little bit. But I remember, you know, often going into Starbucks, and I would insist on speaking Chinese as much as I could, and the person behind the counter would obviously recognize that my accent was terrible and would reply to me in English. So we would have this absurd conversation both ways. In terms of kind of wrapping up the conversation, for people who are really interested in moving overseas, leading an international school overseas, or even just starting that career journey overseas, what would be your advice to them? You know, maybe thinking about Saudi, maybe thinking about your wider experience. What are there 2 or 3 things you would say, look, you really got to think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that the number one thing is think about really the type of school you want to go to. I mean, the ultimately our work is the major part of our life. Yeah, we all have hopefully, you know, life outside of work, but work is such a massive part of life. And it's certainly, you know, if I go out and socialize on the weekend, probably one of the first things my friends say to me is, "How's work?" And you talk for a few minutes about work. So I think, you know, we're all different in terms of as educators. So I think knowing the type of school that you'd like to go to is the first thing. And then I know that nowadays, you know, the reality is that many people are applying to all over the world for jobs, you know, especially now through recruiters, through certain recruitment portals. It's very easy to send your CV off here and everywhere. But I think you really got to have a desire and a reason as to actually genuinely really interested in coming to Saudi or going to Southeast Asia or China, because countries are so incredibly different. So I think having an idea of the type of school you want to go to and where you want to go to, and really spending quality time researching it. And then finally, you know, the actual school as well. You know, you've been international for a number of years. There are some schools that are, you know, an incredibly high standard of school, very reputable, very, I suppose, transparent and honest. Unfortunately, there are other schools that maybe what you see on the website or what you see in the prospectus isn't necessarily quite what you arrive at. And there's an element of luck involved, but also, you know, now with the internet and with, you know, the interconnected world, there is opportunity if you put in a bit of time to really dig into schools and find out about them. And I think that, yeah, where you want to go to, the type of school you want to go to, and then really researching the school that you're applying to are the 3 bits of advice I'd really give people.
Fantastic. I think that's the wisdom we're going to leave on. Alistair, thank you so much for being part of the conversation today. I think it's amazing to talk to you. I think we probably could have gone on for a couple of hours because I wanted to dig into the culture and Riyadh and Saudi. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Middle East, the culture. You know, I really enjoyed my my time there. I still have friends from the region. So thank you very much for today. So this podcast is brought to everyone through TIC recruitment portal, which we were talking about earlier. So do check them out online, LinkedIn. And I know that Jamie, who runs TIC, is very, very happy to connect with people and talk further about the opportunities that are there. Leading an international school, our aim is to have these conversations and hopefully highlight some really great advice and talk to really great people, especially like Alistair with 4 startups and numerous different countries. And I know, Alistair, you're on LinkedIn as well. So I mean, people can kind of connect with you there. And
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much, and we'll see you again next time. Bye. Bye bye.
Thanks. Take care. Thanks, Barry.